What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Whew, Lord, we about to have church in here. Marvel Legacy, man, I'm excited. Man, I'm excited. Marvel Legacy #1 is so good. Oh my God, dude, this story is so good. This is literally Marvel's DC Rebirth. That's what this is. Now, whether or not the rest of this will hold up to the one shot, I don't know. I mean, those stories haven't come out yet. But for right now, man, dude, this is absolutely amazing. Okay, so here's the deal. Marvel Legacy is Marvel's response to all new, all different Marvel. Marvel's going back to the drawing board and they're saying, okay, fine, let's just do this DC Rebirth-esque sort of thing. Marvel Legacy is designed for that purpose. It's designed to basically take Marvel, quote unquote, back to its roots. Dare I say, it's probably entirely possible to read like Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, and then read Secret Wars, and then read this. Like literally skip over all new, all different Marvel. Now we will see things, references to like Secret Empire, stuff like that, but we don't know if that's ever going to play a role later on. But what this initially does is it actually picks up about 1 billion years ago, and it picks up, I'm sorry, 1 million years ago rather, and it picks up with, I guess, the earliest iteration of the Avengers. What Marvel's basically saying at the moment is that the Avengers as a team, which is to say people who fight to save the world, have always been around. There's always been a team that served the purpose of saving the world. In this instance, it's actually Odin alongside the Phoenix and a handful of others. Now we'll get to who these characters are here in a second, but it's actually an intriguing concept. And the reason why is because what this does is this takes the origin of the Marvel Universe in a lot of ways, and it incorporates itself into it, and then it makes a few modifications. For example, we have seen instances where Marvel has given us like the origin of the Celestials. And they say in the origin of the Celestials, they're responsible for the creation of all things. But we've also seen stories where it's basically Odin who's responsible for the creation of all things. And that seems to be the case here. It seems to be that what's going on here is Marvel's drawing on the old Tales of Asgard stories, where they basically had this origin of Asgard itself and saying that it was basically the creation of the World Tree Yggdrasil, the actions of Odin that led to the formation of Earth. The weird scenario here is the Phoenix. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, the Phoenix Force is a character that actually has an origin, and it was covered in the Excalibur comics, but there wasn't a whole lot to it. In truth, a lot of people don't know about the origin of the Phoenix. A lot of folks never read Excalibur. A lot of folks don't really know how all that works, but the way the Phoenix functions is it's basically the sum total of all life and psionic energy that has ever, currently does, and will ever exist across the multiverse. There's only ever one Phoenix Force in the whole multiverse, but it does have different hosts in each individual universe. What this story does, and what Jason Aaron as a writer is actually doing, is he's coming back and saying the Phoenix and Odin have a long-standing history together. And there's room for this because the Phoenix Force's history before it encountered Jean Grey is basically a blank slate. You can literally write whatever you want to and it fits in. What this also does is it hits back to the nature of the hammer as it was created by Odin. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with the history of Odin's son's hammer, for years and years and years in Marvel Comics, it was really just this idea that like the hammer was created by the dwarves and it was taken by Odin and it had some magical enchantments put on it, and then Odin's son lifted it one day and he'd been lifting it ever since up until he lost his ability to lift it. And that was really it. What Jason Aaron did is he came back and he said, well, actually, there was this cosmic storm called the God Tempest, and it was literally a storm that was capable of going through and annihilating entire systems. And so what Odin did is he actually fought the storm, confined it inside of a piece of Uru metal, and had that Uru metal turned into the hammer. At this point, the God Tempest is still inside the hammer. And the reason we know this is because Odin is struggling to lift the hammer because it has its own sentience, because it has its own power. And that's kind of the cool thing about it. Going forward, Odin realized the hammer was just too dangerous for any one person to lift. And so he simply just, sat it down and put enchantment that only those who were worthy could lift the hammer. And that was it. It just sat there forever and ever and ever until Odin's son was able to pick it up. But what this also does is it gives us characters like Starbrand. It gives us characters like an Iron Fist that existed 1 million years ago, a Black Panther that existed 1 million years ago. And that's the cool thing, because again, if you're familiar with the history of the Marvel Universe, all this stuff makes sense. It fits in perfectly. The Starbrand, for example, is an interesting concept. The Starbrand is basically this idea that there's something called the white event. And the white event is basically a scenario where a universe will face a threat of such an extreme degree, or a sentient society on Earth, or any sentient society within any of the worlds in a universe, will reach a point where they're ready to handle a power of such extreme measure. And what'll happen is a white event will trigger. And when that white event triggers, then a person is selected to be a star brand. Now it's kind of weird because originally the star brand basically had as much power as they needed to defeat any foe at any particular point in time. The problem with this is that during the events of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, they were fighting foes capable of destroying cosmic entities. If the star brand maintained its original role, then there would have been no need for anybody else. The star brand would have just killed everybody. And so the result is that star brand's power was actually decreased in order to make him just a run-of-the-mill superhero with all different kinds of, energy abilities and so on and so forth. But what this tells us is that going all the way back to the earliest days of Earth's history, that these other dimensions still existed. Asgard, dimensions like, where Bast resides, dimensions like Kunlun, different things like that. Those have always been there. It's just only recently that we ever found out that they were actually there. One of the new exceptions here is a celestial called the Fallen. Now, we don't know anything about this guy. I've never heard of this celestial before, but celestials are inherently beings of insane power, and these Avengers actually managed to defeat it. Now, keep in mind, this celestial seems to be weaker than the others. And the reason why is because even Odin himself would struggle against the full might of a celestial. In this scenario, they face off against it and they do end up defeating it, but we don't really see how that happens. Instead, we just kind of see them rushing into battle, and then that's really about it. What we end up doing here is we pick up with Robbie Reyes. Now, this is a part of the story that seems to come out of nowhere, but in fact, it actually works. And the reason why is because it'll actually pick up with the end of this story in terms of what the aftermath of this is. But again, Marvel Legacy is designed to give people a tour of the Marvel Universe of sorts, but also begin setting up these individual character arcs that will go forward within Marvel Comics. Now, Robbie Reyes is basically this guy who's possessed by the spirit of Eli Morrow. And what this does is it allows him to basically become the Ghost Rider. But in this scenario, what he ends up doing is actually running directly into the new Star brand, or running directly into Kevin Conner, I think his name is. Now, it's kind of weird because this is the version of Star brand that we saw in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. The kicker is that when Secret Empire happened, he was just one of the heroes who was cast out of Earth. He originally was in a story alongside Night Mask, which was canceled after 12 issues. It didn't last very long, which was really disappointing because we got a huge exploration of the Marvel cosmology and the different cosmic entities, but nobody really seemed to be interested in it at the time. And so because of that, it was really Star brand just kind of faded into the background, and that was really about it. In this scenario, he actually ends up attacking Robbie Reyes. Now, the reason for this seems to be that he's basically just hiding out. The issue is that when he gets into a fight with Robbie Reyes, it draws out the Ghost Rider. And so again, this is a really cool scenario, but before we end up finding out what happens with that, what we do is we jump to Loki. Now remember, Loki has his own scheme, his own thing going on with regards to Asgard and the Thor stories that are being written right now and so on and so forth. He basically has a larger role to play, but we don't really know what that role is. Presumably, this fits into it. And the reason why is because where he's been working behind the scenes and where there seems to basically be some sort of ulterior motive going on between Loki and Frigga, we don't really know, again, what the secret role is, if he's a double agent or whatever the case may be, but it's this long running scheme that he's been having really since All New, All Different Marvel started. And so this part basically seems to come into play when he grabs these, frost giants that are basically kind of cast off and then takes them into Area 51 for the purpose of going through and trying to find some sort of artifact. Now, the arrival of these frost giants trying to find whatever this artifact is, it brings the attention of Jane Foster Thor, of Sam Wilson, again, back in this modern day right now, and they basically just start fighting the frost giants. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. What ends up happening is that one of them actually grabs the box they're supposed to be getting and then simply just takes off. Now, there are a couple of things that happen in between this, most notably with Steve Rogers and with Odin's son. And the reason why is because in the aftermath of Secret Empire, as we'd covered, and again, you'll find that playlist down in the description, Steve Rogers, with his official return and defeating the Hydra version of himself, he's basically just kind of gone in hiding. He's basically playing it low key. He's kind of taking a break from everything. Remember, right now, Sam Wilson's still Captain America. And so for the moment, Steve Rogers has not stepped into that role. Now, he probably will because he does have a Captain America shield. This sets the stage for the idea that going forward, he will resume his role. And most likely, you'll have Sam Wilson and you'll have Steve Rogers operating as Captain America at the same time, no clue. But the biggest part of this is it switches over to Odin's son. And what this ends up doing is it gives us a one-page statement that there is a being, an Asgardian, on the Bifrost Bridge that basically connects these different worlds and allows Asgardians to jump from one world to the next. This guy had a glimpse that a being called Mangog is making a return. Now, Mangog is crazy. Dude, this guy as a villain is intense. Mangog is basically indestructible. He literally feeds his own power by feeding on the fear of everybody around the universe. It's super, super cool. If I remember correctly, he has like, enough strength to kill virtually any Asgardian, super speed, all different kinds of things, but he can also manipulate matter. Now, how extensive that will be, I don't know. I mean, it was matter manipulation confined to like the Walt Simonson era of Thor at the time. And so we don't really know like how extensive it'll be now versus how it was then, but he was certainly a wrecking ball. Like, it was enough to decimate virtually anybody. But one of the other huge reveals here is we end up finding out that Tony Stark is missing. Tony Stark's body's gone and no one knows where it went. It's just out there somewhere. Nobody has any clue about what's going on with it. Now, of course, switching back over to this fight between Starbrand and Robbie Reyes, it's a pretty important battle between the two. In the middle of all this, Starbrand is hit with the pendant stare of, Robbie Reyes, a power that he never had before. But the reason why this matters is because in this moment, Starbrand basically sees what's coming. And what he realizes is that a celestial, the fallen, will awaken and he will call the final host. And when he does, all hell is gonna break loose. And that's exactly what takes place. What ends up happening here is that in the aftermath of this fight between Robbie Reyes and Starbrand, we end up having a couple of guys who make their way down into this cave. They're destroyed by the fallen celestial, and he simply says, summon the final host, cleanse them all. Now, the reason why this is so important, the reason why this is necessary is because of the fact that the celestial host is basically an instance of judgment. To get a little bit of history here, in Marvel Comics, if we take this history, this new history into account, and we say, okay, so Odin was really responsible for like the creation of Earth. If we say that the rest of the history still remains intact, that somewhere along the line, the celestials showed up on Earth and they modified the genes of humans so that some humans would become mutants, they would have an X gene that would activate somewhere along the line, and other humans would have their genes activated so that when they were blasted with gamma radiation, instead of just being irradiated with tumors, they would turn into the Incredible Hulk. What they ended up doing was coming back periodically to basically check on their experiment. Now, the arrival of those celestials were called hosts, and there have been a handful of them over the years. This would basically be the fifth host. But what this means is that if the celestials come back, there will be a celestial that will basically look upon everything that's going on, and all the other celestials will defer to their judgment. I believe it's Ashima the judge. And what will happen is that this celestial will say everything's going according to plan, or things are not going according to plan. If things are not going according to plan, they will sanitize the entirety of the planet. And I'll be honest with you guys, there's no one on the earth right now who would be able to stop them. Not one. But again, picking up with this story as we continue on, what ends up happening is we basically have these little interjections for stories that are coming later on down the line. In the Alpha Flight Deep Space Monitoring Station out in New Mexico, one of the guys walks away from monitoring signals only for us to find out that as soon as this happens, a signal comes in from Sakaar. Basically, these people saying, we need the Incredible Hulk to come back. A hit back to the events of Planet Hulk. We also end up having these really interesting moments. I mean, when we end up finding out this member of the Frost Giants had made off with this case, as soon as he takes off, he's immediately hit by a Mack truck. And when he is, the person inside is the original Wolverine. All we know is that during the events of the death of Wolverine, he was literally encased in adamantium. It was just adamantium that was liquefied and poured all over his skin, and he died inside of it. But we don't know how he got out. All we know is that he did, and he's here now. What we also end up finding out when he kills this frost giant is the artifact that they were going after was an Infinity Stone. It was the Space Stone. So again, this is huge because we basically have this whole thing where like Gamora looks at everything and says somebody is running around and trying to gather the Infinity Stones again. And so it's awesome to see these coming back because this is really the only way that anybody would be able to defeat the final celestial host. At least that seems to be the case. But what ends up taking place is we jump out of everything that's happening on Earth into the middle of nowhere. God only knows what's going on. And we end up finding out that this story as it's existed has been narrated by Valeria Richards, who's accompanied by Franklin Richards, the children of Reed. And they say, Dad has another universe for us to explore. So the exploration of the multiverse as it's being created by Reed Richards, Franklin and Valeria and Susan and Molecule Man is still taking place. The aftermath to Secret Wars is still going on. Not only that, this is the first time that we basically end up seeing any reference of any kind to Reed Richards in the main Marvel universe. The idea that we actually see him being acknowledged as still being alive, this is a massive moment moment. Now, whether or not the Fantastic Four will actually come back together, we don't know. But this is an amazing story because all Marvel Legacy is designed to do is basically say, here's where each individual character arc is going to start picking up. That the Incredible Hulk or even Amadeus Cho Hulk is going to go back to Planet Hulk. They're going to go back to Sakaar. That we're going to have all these events taking place. Deadpool's a villain now. You know, he's back to being a bad guy. But it's also the concept that we're probably going to see some exploration about what's been going on with Reed Richards and company, what they've been doing ever since Secret Wars ended. To me, that's the most exciting part, because if we end up getting a book like that, I imagine it'll just be a tour of the multiverse. It'll just be all these different universes and the differences between those and the main Marvel universe. But I'm so excited because if all the other stories that come out after this follow the trend as it's been established here, it's going to be one hell of a ride. But with that being said, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. Make sure you check the description. There will be a playlist with all the character story arcs: Iron Man, Thor, the Incredible Hulk, Captain America, all of which lead directly into Secret Wars and then directly into this. Of course, we'll also do Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. I'm waiting for Infinity War to drop before we actually release that video. We're waiting for the trailer to drop anyway. But anyway, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.